So today's subject matter is a compilation, a collection of Activision classic games for the Atari 2600. You know what, that title is a little long in the tooth, so let's just call it Activision Classics. That sounds about right. Activision Classics is a 1998 compilation release for the original Sony PlayStation, comprising 30 Activision Classics that originally appeared for the Atari 2600 video computer system. The 30 classics comprised in this Activision's Classics collection comprise the following: Atlantis, Barnstorming, Boxing, Chopper Command, Cosmic Commuter, Crackpots, Dolphin, Dragster, Enduro, Fishing Derby, Freeway, Frostbite, Grand Prix, Hero, Ice Hockey, Kaboom, Keystone Capers, Laser Blast, Megamania, Pitfall, Plaque Attack, River Raid 2, Sequest, Skiing, Skyjinx, Spider Fighter, Stampede, Star Master, and finally, Tennis. That's quite a varied collection of classic 2600 games from Activision. Nothing seemingly out of the ordinary, nothing really amazing or noteworthy save for the fact that Atlantis is the only iMagic game represented in the set. A shame really, I was kinda hoping for some Demon Attack in this, but also I was kinda hoping that Pitfall 2 would be there since that's a much better game than the original, but whatever, there's still a fairly decent selection of Activision classics to be found here. You have your essentials such as Pitfall and River Raid and Kaboom, Enduro, all or, well, most solid classic Atari VCS games that are as enjoyable to play today as they were 20 to 30 years ago. Now, I'm not going to do a major rundown of each game in the collection because then we'd be here forever. But for the most part, you're getting the best of Activision's 2600 lineup. I've already mentioned a couple like Pitfall and the like, but there's also Keystone Capers, Hero, Megamania, Grand Prix, Spider Fighter, some other, pretty solid and fun games to play. Some of the games have multiple game modes you can play through. You can toggle the difficulty switches if you like, swap between color and monochrome television, and you can even play some music in the background, which is okay, but I never bothered with that function. Sounds alright, I guess. In terms of presentation, there's not much to it. There's a title screen and a menu screen where you can choose from the various games available to play. The menu looks fairly decent, but not much else. The compilation itself is pretty bare bones for the most part. You pick a game, you pick one of several game modes if the selected game has more than the default game mode, and that's about it. There's no commercials or box arts or in-game manuals to preview. There's no patches to win. There's no screen filters like cubic thing, this and that. You're just getting 30 classic Atari games, and that's that. And that's fine. The game does have the ability to save games for whatever reason, like save states or something. I don't know. Somebody might find some use for it here. I sure as hell didn't. What I'm generally not a fan of, however, is the way you can swap games. I'm not talking about switching from something like River Raid to Hero or whatever. I'm talking about the in-game modes. Anyone who has played Atari back in the day knows that, some Atari games have different game modes, same game but different rules of play generally, and it's usually easy to switch between various game modes. Relatively easy to do on the Atari. Activision Classics, on the other hand, is not so easy because there's no in-game way to switch game modes. You could reset the game, but you could toggle the difficulty switches, but you cannot just swap the in-game mode of and things. Let's say you're playing Freeway, you're going on the easiest road, and you want to switch from the easiest road to a slightly more difficult road. There's no button in-game to switch between the various game modes. You have to go back to the title screen, and yes, whenever you quit a game, it goes back to the title screen every single time. Why not go to the menu, whatever, but it switches you back to the title screen, and then you have to go to the menu, and then you pick the same game as before, and then you could pick the different mode that you want to play. It is a cumbersome, tedious, and drawn-out process that really should not have been in place to begin with. You should be able to switch modes in-game much like in an actual Atari game. Thankfully, the Activision ethnology kept it simple when they brought that over to PS2, which is a good thing, but that doesn't exist at the time of this game's release, unfortunately. In terms of the emulation of the actual games, well, they work well enough, they play well enough, they mostly resemble and sound like the original Atari software. but on a whole the emulation is pretty disappointing. There's a few technical issues that really take the overall package down a notch, the most notable which are the sound quality and the speed of the games. Sound for the most part is somewhat accurate compared to the original Atari software, but there's a bit of a muffled quality to the overall sound, almost as if the sounds were being played off a tape recorder or something to that extent. Even on the highest volume setting, sound at points seemed a bit quiet and quite muffled, and there's occasions where certain sound effects will be louder than others. And then there's the speed of the emulation of the games, which generally move a tad slower than the Atari originals. It wasn't too noticeable at first until I came across River Raid, where the scrolling seemed quite choppy compared to the 2600 original, which featured nice, smooth scrolling. And also everything seemed to move, here it moved like choppy, sluggish. And also became apparent that the slower rate affected gameplay because a lot of games were based on quick reflexes and timing. And this issue, slow speed, can throw off that timing, especially if you were an ace player at some of these older games. It's really depressing and just adds to the overall sloppiness of the package. There's other minor details as well. Destroying bridges in River Raid doesn't cause the screen to flash like it should. And then there's the strange pink walls and keystone capers that were never in the original release. There's a couple oddities as well in a couple other games, but I really don't want to dwell into that. This is a heartbreaker. It really is. Here is a compilation disc that promised the reliving of childhoods long gone and the remembrance of a simpler time in video games. And what Activision Classics offers falls short of that promise. There's no arguing about the choice of games on this disc. It's your usual Activision Atari 2600 fare, and you're bound to find some good, fun classics to enjoy. They're just gonna play a little slower, they're gonna sound a little more crap, and they only serve to emphasize how difficult it is, or was, to properly emulate old hardware. In terms of revisiting old Atari memories, this is probably not the best way to go. Not at all. I would suggest tracking down a copy of Activision Anthology for PlayStation 2, which is a much better compilation with slightly more games and slightly more content, but the games all play much better than they do here. Of course, you could always track down the original Atari hardware and software. That works nicely as well. This compilation, on the other hand, not so much.